I was 12 years old, spending a fair amount of time at my grandmother's cabin at Pine Grove State Furnace. Pine Grove has always been haunted, mostly due to Fuller Lake, a water-filled, old, open-pit iron mine. Though the Park Service has gone so far as to send divers down to the bottom to prove that no one was killed, many people have seen ghostly horses stampeding from the old stables to the lake and into the water, making it glow a deep blue before disappearing. My story, as far as I'm aware, has never been duplicated or replicated. It involves an old iron horse that wasn't quite ready to be scrapped. I was walking back along the old rail bed that runs from Laurel Lake, a man-made lake slightly larger than Fuller, at dusk in June. I did not fear being alone in the woods after dark. I knew the woods and the mountain as well as the back of my hand, just like my father did before me. It had just turned fully dark when I noticed something peculiar. It was silent, dead silent. People that are from the woods will tell you that it is almost never completely silent. There is always some critter rustling through the leaves, a cicada or cricket chirping, a great horned owl hooting its dominance. The fact that there was nothing unnerved me and made me anxious to get back to the cozy little cabin, so I increased my pace. I was more or less speed walking along this deserted silent trail. The only sound I heard was my sneakers crunching on the cinders. Tall pine trees on both sides of the trail cast shadows down on me, making it difficult to see. I was just reflecting on how dark it was when I heard a sound I will never forget for as long as I live. The long, lonesome wail of a steam whistle. I recognized it from a trip to the Strasburg Railway when I was younger. Nothing in the woods could replicate that sound. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I looked around. The place was as empty as a church on Monday. I was in the deserted part of the trail. The nearest cabin was 2 miles away in the opposite direction. I simply told myself that my mind was playing tricks on me and kept walking. Then I heard it again, and it was getting closer. A faint light appeared behind me, so faint that it was barely recognizable as a light source. I told myself that it was swamp gas. It is quite a marshy area around the trail, and that my mind was continuing to pull sound out of nothing to make up for the silence. I kept walking, thinking about fresh biscuits and wild grape jam to take my mind off of things when I noticed that the light was slowly growing brighter. I had seen swamp gas lights before. They usually only lasted moments and weren't terribly bright. The main thing that told me that it wasn't my mind was the ground. It was vibrating. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight as arrows. Earthquakes weren't unheard of, but it felt and sounded like something heavy pounding the ground rather than a jarring movement of an earthquake. I was properly scared, thinking about wendigos and other supernatural monsters that lived in the woods. I stepped off the trail and crouched down by a thick pine tree, waiting for whatever it was to go by and let me go on with my business. I became aware of a slow snorting sound, making me again think of the giant 80-foot wendigos that turned people into cannibals with their touch. I also realized that the light was growing brighter, and the rumbling of the ground was slowing down. It came around a long sweeping curve at a crawl, slowing to a stop in front of me. It was a Big 6, a 2-10-2 Baltimore and Ohio operated locomotive number 6666. It hissed to a stop, its giant driving wheels resting on the bare cinders. It was shrouded in a light blue mist of steam and wore a deep black coat of paint that seemed to suck all available light into it, except the bright light of the front spotlight. The steam mist, when it hit me, turned cold. I bit hard on my knuckles trying to control myself. 2 blue lights were in its cab, as if on cue. One hopped down and crouched in the bushes for a moment. I heard a sound of stressed steel and clack. An invisible switch had been thrown by the ghost fireman. The blue light then took the opportunity to walk slowly around this 91-foot-long, evil-looking locomotive before casually climbing back up the ladder into the cab. I then saw the firebox open, and I heard such a scream. The kind of scream you'd never want to hear again. The sound of someone being roasted alive. Almost as quickly as it had opened, the firebox door shut with a clang, and then a long, soulfully sad song of the whistle chimed again. Big Six puffed a blue cloud of steam up out of its short black smokestack as it rolled slowly across the invisible switch. It took a sharp, almost 90-degree turn, much too sharp for any real locomotive, and puffed away into the woods. The whole encounter lasted probably no more than 4 or 5 minutes, but believe me, I had seen more than enough. I did the rest of the trail at a dead sprint and didn't stop until I was in the cabin with the thick wooden door locked behind me. My grandparents, parents, and friends have tried unsuccessfully to get the story out of me, but I had never told about it until this day. The story about how I had seen one of the scrapped Big Sixes that burned people for fuel. There's an old deserted graveyard that's somewhere in Birchville, South Dakota, where people once buried their dead, but no longer due to some odd things happening there. It was once a place where the town would bury their departed loved ones from the 1880s to the early 1910s until, according to some, a few supernatural hauntings happened. Some of those who were buried at the graveyard were Lakota civilians who were massacred during the wars between the United States and the Plains Indians in the 19th century. A couple of them were Lakota warriors who died trying to defend their families. Because of this, some would venture into the graveyard at night and would claim they saw what looks like a really angry-faced dog soldier with a tomahawk and a Winchester rifle. Of course, there were some who were skeptical of the haunting, and a couple of teens from the town went to the place on a dare, as kids would do. One of the teens dared a boy to stay in the graveyard overnight, to see if he could prove himself brave, so he stayed there for a night. The next day, they had to make a search party for him since he hadn't shown up for school and his family was worried. The teens, feeling guilty and in fear, told the adults that they went to the graveyard and dared him into going in. When the townsfolk got to the graveyard, they found the boy hanging from a tree, gutted with his entrails on the ground while the top of his head was scalped. This was one of the reasons that led to the graveyard being abandoned. Another instance was a rumor about some type of devil creature wandering nearby, and that it didn't appear there until some strange-looking woman started going up there. She always appeared to carry some type of strange-looking book. There were rumors that she was a witch, and people simply dismissed the whole thing as only that, a rumor. But those who would sometimes venture there usually heard some type of cackling, and sometimes cloven hoof-shaped prints would appear in the ground and snow. No one knows what happened to the so-called witch. She disappeared just like she appeared. But the ghost of the dog soldier and the demon weren't the only paranormal sightings in the area. Some people said they could see the Grim Reaper whenever they watched someone getting buried. Sometimes, death would point towards someone, and that person would die. Sometimes, he pointed to the old, and later on, he decided to point to the younger people. In 1908, one such person was a bright and healthy kid who saw death pointing at him during his grandfather's funeral, and later on, he died in the First World War. Another man got his face kicked and trampled by a horse when he tried to ride after he saw the Reaper. Basically, seeing death at a graveyard beckoning you was always seen as an omen and also a death sentence. After that, the graveyard was abandoned and a new one was made. The old graveyard is not on the map due to all the bad luck associated with it, but there will always be people trying to look for it, and if they do, They will most likely be cursed and haunted for the rest of their lives. Everyone knows about the dumbass ghost story at Jones Park, Indiana, that some girl died at her birthday party. I never bought it, probably just a publicity stunt, like the ones that Bill Channel does. I lived pretty close to that place, and I went to try it out, just for fun, all by myself. Driving there, I felt this strange sensation, a feeling of dread and pleasure, like it was where I'm meant to be. I shook it off. Pulling in, the sights unsettled me. Tall, lush trees shredded the decaying wood fence, not being used since whatever happened that day. It was midnight, 1:23 to be exact. I snuck through the gate, whatever was left of it. The decimated hinges didn't hold anything, and the remains of the doors were under my feet. I slowly walked in, having a horrible feeling that I was being watched by someone or something. The forest, once a tame park, was gloomy with tall trees and swamps. A wheel of a car, the seemingly only remnant of civilization, was half buried in the soil. Not exactly giving me a feeling of hope, a little poster was hung on one of the labyrinth of trees, shredded and soaked. I stepped ahead to get a closer look. It was yellowed from all its years in the sun, and barely even touchable from all its years in the rain. It read, quite clearly, "Birthday party at Jones Park, June 7th, 1998. Come on down to our daughter Dorothy's birthday party." Well, why would her family put an ad for a random party to the most public place in the state at the time? I wrote down the date, June 7th, 1998. Seemed pretty important. It's been, wait a second, exactly 20 years since that happened. How? I trudged in a little further, until I thought I saw something in the corner of my eye. I turned my head as fast as I could, and all I could make out before it disappeared was the shape of a little girl with a cone hat on. It vanished the second I saw it. Knowing I wasn't alone was a bit nerve-wracking, but what if I was hallucinating? I knew this wouldn't turn into some crazy BS, but still. Just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, a newspaper blew onto my feet. It was in surprisingly good condition, but half of it was stained out because of mud. I could barely make out anything, but I could see, girl, 7, killed in freak accident at birthday. Rest was smudged out. A freak accident? I was just about to call it quits and head back to my car when I heard the sounds of the happy birthday song. Stopping in my tracks, I went closer and closer to the source of the sounds. It was 2:48, so I wondered who could be singing it at this hour. I stopped when I saw a crowd, seemingly celebrating a small birthday. Men, women, children, and babies were standing all around each other. They had a strange, unearthly color to their skin. I walked a little closer, and if I was asked to leave, I would. But even as I got closer and closer, they kept socializing and partying. Then I saw her, a little girl about 6 or 7, with dreadful black tears drooling from where her eyes should have been. Her eyes were black voids. She had dingy, soggy, blackened hair. She was wearing a torn party dress, once a lively yellow, now a rotted beige. She had enormous, sickening bloody gashes all over her body. The most disturbing thing about her was part of her cracked jawbone was exposed, something oozing out of it. She was dancing around like nothing had happened to her, despite the blatantly obvious. All of a sudden, she saw me. Her cold, eyeless gaze struck horror into my heart. She walked slowly over to me, her filthy bare feet crunching the leaves below her, and she said, "You came to celebrate my birthday." I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. She just grabbed me by my hand, ants and those bugs with claws on their butts swarming out of a gash on her arm. I tried to let go. I tried to resist, but it just wouldn't work. When we got to where she wanted to go, a blinding light filled the area around me. When my eyes adjusted, it was a more lively scene. Butterflies, green grass, and the little girl looked, well, human. "My name is Dorothy," she whispered. "What's yours?" I just blurted it out. "Charlie." I realized with a start, this was the birthday girl. Presents were on the table. Barbies, Beanie Babies. This was the 90s after all, and a DVD of Toy Story. But the item that caught my attention the most was a large brightly colored machine. It was essentially a giant rectangle, as big as a small car. Its most prominent feature was its large, sharp as knives teeth. When Dorothy saw me staring at it, the sun and happiness instantly faded, and it was 3:15 again. She said, "This is my favorite part." I was confused, but then the machine's mouth opened, and its teeth started crashing into each other, crunching all the way. I was looking inside it, and I was caught off guard by the people there. They grabbed me and started walking me over inside the machine. Finally, I realized this was the way Dorothy died on her birthday. These people weren't the partygoers. They were lost souls. "Have fun," Dorothy stammered, crying of laughter. The last thing I saw were blades, then black. Everyone is always happy here. The cake is delicious. The games are always fun. Dorothy is a wonderful playmate. She said we'll have fun forever and ever. And that's just what I'm gonna do. When Felix Agnes put up the life-size shrouded bronze statue of a grieving angel, seated on a pedestal, in the Agnes family plot in the Druid Ridge Cemetery, he had no idea what he had started. The statue was a rather eerie figure by day, frozen in a moment of grief and terrible pain. At night, the figure was almost unbelievably creepy, the shroud over its head obscuring the face until you were up close to it. There was a living air about the grieving angel, as if its arms could really reach out and grab you if you weren't careful. It didn't take long for rumors to sweep through the town and surrounding countryside. They said that the statue, nicknamed Black Aggie, was haunted by the spirit of a mistreated wife who lay beneath her feet. The statue's eyes would glow red at the stroke of midnight, and any living person who returned the statue's gaze would instantly be struck blind. Any pregnant woman who passed through her shadow would miscarry. If you sat on her lap at night, the statue would come to life and crush you to death in her dark embrace. If you spoke Black Aggie's name 3 times at midnight in front of a dark mirror, the evil angel would appear and pull you down to hell. They also said that spirits of the dead would rise from their graves on dark nights to gather around the statue at night. People began visiting the cemetery just to see the statue, and it was then that the local fraternity decided to make the statue of grief part of their initiation rites. Black Aggie, sitting where candidates for membership had to spend the night crouched beneath the statue with their backs to the grave of General Agnes, became popular. One dark night, 2 fraternity members accompanied New Hopeful to the cemetery and watched while he took his place underneath the creepy statue. The clouds had obscured the moon that night, and the whole area surrounding the dark statue was filled with a sense of anger and malice. It felt as if a storm were brewing in that part of the cemetery, and to their chagrin, the 2 fraternity members noticed that gray shadows seemed to be clustering around the body of the frightened fraternity candidate crouching in front of the statue. What had been a funny initiation rite suddenly took on an air of danger. One of the fraternity brothers stepped forward in alarm to call out the initiate. As he did, the statue above the boy stirred ominously. The 2 fraternity brothers froze in shock as the shrouded head turned towards the new candidate. They saw the gleam of glowing red eyes beneath the concealing hood as the statue's arms reached out toward the cowering boy. With shouts of alarm, The fraternity brothers leapt forward to rescue the new initiate, but it was too late. The initiate gave one horrified yell, and then his body disappeared into the embrace of the dark angel. The fraternity brothers skidded to a halt as the statue thoughtfully rested its glowing eyes upon them. With gasps of terror, the boys fled from the cemetery before the statue could grab them too. Hearing the screams, a night watchman hurried to the Agnes plot. To his chagrin, he discovered the body of a young man lying at the foot of the statue. The young man had apparently died of fright. The disruption caused by the statue grew so acute that the Agnes family finally donated it to the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. The grieving angel sat for many years in storage there, never again to plague the citizens visiting the Druid Hill Park Cemetery. Today was the day he was dreading. He knew they were going to be extremely busy, and quite frankly, he wanted to call out, seeing as he was already late. His thoughts were briefly distracted by his black Tabby, quietly pawing at his legs, ready for its breakfast. He made sure to fill up its bowl before he dashed out the door, returning twice to grab whatever he forgot the first few times, and he was off. He breathed a sigh of relief as the last customer left. It had been the best sales day of the year, and they were obviously gonna celebrate. He had been contemplating going on home, but he needed to unwind too. He had no serious obligations the next day, so he could stay out late as he wanted. So when they asked, he happily agreed to go with them. He couldn't open his eyes. He was barely conscious as it was. He slapped lazily around until he managed to shut the alarm off before he rolled onto his stomach and buried his face in his pillow. The door creaked as his black Tabby walked in and jumped onto his back, where it curled up close to his head. The hot breath in his ear lulled him back to sleep. The doorbell continued to ring. He crawled out of bed and made his way to the front door. It was his next-door neighbor, a kind woman in her late 70s, who still worked. She was in her business suit, holding a trash bag. "Oh, did I wake you up? I thought you were usually up by now." "I usually am," he said groggily, "but they let me have today off." "Well, I hate to come bearing such bad news so early in the morning," she said, patting his hand, "but I ran over your dear Tabby last night when I got home. I came straight over to tell you, but you weren't home." He stared at her for a few seconds before their silence was broken by its footsteps. You've heard it all before, stories of that one depressed, lonely, deprived teenager. The one that finds herself befallen by unspeakable tragedy at the cruel hands of her longtime oppressor. It's become so cliché that you may have even heard the acknowledgement of its overuse elsewhere. This image is only so popular because we are so plentiful. We come from all walks of life, all nationalities, all social statuses. We are the ones whose minds are one with the darkness they fear. The ones whose thoughts are so loud and intense in their heads, they find them whispering them aloud, speaking silent words of perpetual black into the dead night before us, to be carried by the night's chill into utter obscurity, projecting our madness to the full moon, that we may carry some sanity within ourselves, but always to no avail. Perhaps that is all I do now. Speak words into the silent midnight so pitch black that they meld into it, only to find the company of other deranged minds, whispering the same maddened thoughts, never to meet through the stone barriers of shyness. Enough of this, however. You want to hear tales of monsters, curses, tragedy, spirits. Those who hunger for such anomalies of the abyss must have enough dark thoughts within themselves. You don't need mine as well. In my ghetto, inner city school kids exchange whispers of an old myth passed down from the upperclassmen, mostly just to scare the freshmen or act like they're involved with their school. Either way, it goes as this. A few years back, there was a young freshman girl who was eager to begin her glorious high school year. She would spend every hour of night during the week preluding the start of the new school year, dreaming, pondering, and inquiring the wondrous things to come. No more asinine busy work. The next 4 years would dictate where the rest of her life was headed. Then the first week came. It went perfectly, better than she had imagined during those anxious, hopeful nights. Everybody adored her. Her classes were mild and challenging. It was cruel, as if fate had deemed she would live her dream for a time as a mere jest, just to show her what she was missing, to show her what she would be missing for the rest of eternity. She woke up after a relaxing weekend alone. She could feel joy and anticipation dancing in her young heart. She was so oblivious, so confident, so strong. Alas, it would not be enough. Her mom drove her to school as she did every day. They were one turn away as a smile cracked on her face. A smile that would be warped by evil odds, a face twisted by the devil's cruel fire, a face that would drag many others with her into the burning abyss. What were the odds? A large truck smashed into the passenger side where she was sitting as they began to make the turn, crumbling the feeble metal structure into a steel tomb. The engine began to catch fire, and smoke began to fill her lungs. She could see through the shattered glass, the broken image of a desperate mother, smashing her fist into the steel to free her, with a man behind her on the phone. Her seat had curved, and the door was smashed like tin foil. Only one opening revealed itself in this burning prison. It was a crack in the glass, by the corner of the windshield. She knew that she should stay idle. The smoke would choke her out, and that was no way she wanted to die. She reached out and touched glass, only to rear back in pain. The glass was searing hot, parts of it even melting from the fire. She knew what she had to do. The image of her school and her future infuriated her with an inhuman zeal. She forced her mouth onto the opening and breathed the fresh air, all pain ignored. Her lips peeled back with the heat like plastic to a match. Her hair singed and dissipated. Her flesh warped and cauterized in place like human clay. Several minutes passed in this agonizing state, until through the broken windshield, red lights flashed, and sirens sounded over her mother's hysterical cries from watching her beautiful daughter changed into this monster just to survive. She spent 3 blind, bitter months in the hospital, the white gauze making her hideous transformation. Then the day came. The mask was taken off, though nobody could find the appropriate reaction. Her lips were charred black outlines for her melted teeth. Her lower jaw seemed almost unhinged. Perhaps worst of all was that look of pure bitter sorrow and spite when she herself saw what she was. She refused to speak a word, not that it was easy without proper lips or a functioning lower jaw. She spent the next miserable month in her room, unfit to return to school. She began diving deep into the internet. Perhaps a sick part of her wanted to see its dark underside, just to prove to herself she was not the only one. She eventually couldn't take it. She didn't want to be seen. She couldn't be seen. She logged onto the Wikipedia, created a blank page, and began furiously typing all her spite, all her hate, pouring her heart, channeling her very soul into that page. The story goes that once she had poured all of her soul into that page, she had no reason to stay anchored to her broken body. She parted before she could post. That page remained blank for some time. The students then fabricated the myth that should you stare into that blank page for too long, she will suck your soul into it with hers. This is that page. Now you might ask yourself, why am I going here knowing this terrible myth? Am I some kind of skeptic, trying to give you a scare? No, I'm here because I'm alone. Because here, I have someone like me, someone to whisper dark nothings into abyssal silence with. I'll be joining her soon, and you'll be joining us. We dark-minded people should stick together. Misery loves company, and with each stolen soul, this abyss becomes that much less of a void. I do apologize for ruining this page's blank reputation, by the way. You are dark-minded like us. It's time you tragically joined us in our little blackness. Of all these pages to choose from, what are the odds? I was in my bedroom as usual, just sitting there on my old dirty bed, until I felt a disturbance within myself. It started with curiosity, and then ended with fear and worry. This strange sensation lasted for about roughly 10 minutes, until I decided to get out of bed and reassure myself that there was nothing to be worried about. I searched my entire house, the dirty old bathroom and its untidy drawers, my clean kitchen and the nice tidy cupboards. The kitchen is the only thing I kept clean due to my passion for cooking. I've always enjoyed cooking, ever since my mother first taught me when I was a child. I still remember it to this day. She showed me how to cook spaghetti and how to make homemade bologna sauce. Ever since that day, I began to experiment with food and try and come up with new recipes. Anyway, I digress. As I finished searching through my house, in every nook and cranny, I decided that it would be a good idea to go back to bed. My wife was fast asleep. She always gets lots of sleep. I checked the time, 6 a.m. Great, another late night. This routine of feeling strange and searching my house has been going on for almost 4 weeks now. I don't know what started it. Something just doesn't seem right, as if there's something here. I hope it gets better. I haven't slept in weeks. That next day, I got out of bed and went out. I would have gotten ready, but I didn't though. What's the point anymore? No one's gonna notice. As I walked out of my front door, I began to walk down the street. I looked around and saw the battered, rotten old houses, boarded up doors and windows, and I began to remember my friends who used to live there. It's been a long time. What year is it anymore? I said to myself. I really lost it recently. I can't even remember what year it is. After a day of strolling through the streets and thinking of memories past, I decided to go back home. I went into my filthy old house and planked myself onto the couch. I looked across and saw my wife sitting there, sobbing. She's been this way ever since I woke up about 4 weeks ago with that strange sensation I spoke about. We've never spoken since. She sometimes stares at me, sighs, and then looks away. Later that night, as I restlessly paced around my old bedroom, I had that strange feeling as per usual, and I began to search my house to reassure myself, like I usually do, until I found it. The thing that was making me the way I feel the way I do every night. It was my uncle standing there looking at me with happiness. I uttered, Uncle, you've been dead for years." He looked at me with astonishment and said, "I could say the same to you."